Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me on this incredible panel. Thank you, Nadia, for your words. And I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is to just really pick up on some of these points and see where we go. I like to always begin with a very quick acknowledgement to the original custodians of the country that I'm on. It's after 4 a.m. here. I'm in the Redlands Coast in Queensland in Australia, and I'm on the land of the Kwanda people. And I want to acknowledge that I'm on stolen land, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. When I was asked to speak on this panel, initially, my reaction was, my first instinct was to say no, because I felt like voices like mine that convey skepticism and doubt are often not welcomed in times of great hope and euphoria, which was the sense that I was getting from people in Palestine, from family members who are quite hopeful that there will be a positive outcome to the elections. And I believe that our families, brothers and sisters in Palestine really, truly deserve to have hope and to believe that change is possible. And I want this for them. And I also thought that, you know, I live in the Shatat. I live in the diaspora. I live outside of the homeland. And so this election doesn't really include me and doesn't include 2/3 of the Palestinian population who have been dispossessed and pushed outside of their homes and their lands. And that this election is just for those who are part of the idea of a Palestinian state, who are living under occupation in Gaza and in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. And that's really the scope of it. But upon deep reflection, I came to the conclusion that my voice here from exile, from the end of the earth, so to speak, is a Palestinian voice. I am Palestinian. And so I have a right to speak about this, and that this division between those who are under occupation and those who are in 1948 and those who are in refugee camps and those who are in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, this division is really at the heart of the Palestinian politics today. The very nature of the exclusion and the division that has been cemented through years of occupation, of Oslo negotiations, of Palestinian Authority failures and Hamas and Fatah squabbles, not to mention, of course, the Israeli apartheid system that is built and based on separation and segregation. These divisions are really heightened during these elections because the nature of this election is exclusive and not inclusive. And I want to first of all be clear that I understand that there is so much excitement in Palestine over the upcoming elections and that things are dire and any promise of any change falls on our occupied and oppressed people's ears like raindrops after a drought. Of course, there is excitement if there is a promise of change, right? But come May 22nd, we need to be a little bit realistic. We are told that we might have the first national legislative council election in over 15 years for the Palestinian Authority. Basically, since Hamas won, democracy seemed far less attractive. And so the elections were put off year after year, well past the renewal or the electoral expiry date. We are told that 93% of Palestinians are registered to vote today and that most of them were previously registered and that 36 parliamentary lists have been presented and approved, which is quite staggering and incredible. We are told a miracle has happened and that Hamas, Fatah, and other groups have agreed on the mechanism of elections, and these are all positive things. So far, so good. So why be skeptical? We have to look, I think, at some of the unexpected curves that have emerged to understand what's going on here. Even though the elections were seen by many as a power-sharing agreement between Hamas and Fatah, and that within itself is not a good thing for democracy. But Fatah's guaranteed win started to seem less and less likely. Now we heard that Fatah is facing challenges from dissident factions, including the Freedom List, led by Nasir al-Qadwa, a nephew of the late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, and was endorsed by Marwan Barghouti, who's a very popular leader serving multiple life sentences in Israel. And this is a powerful duo that really challenges Mahmoud Abbas and his power base. And there were other power-yielding Fatah dissidents who split from the main, including Abbas's former Gaza security chief, Mahmoud Dahlan, who was currently in exile in Abu Dhabi, and former Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, who's an ex-World Bank official with a track record of fighting occupation, has also split from the main Fatah sphere. And we heard that while Fatah is being weakened by these inside divisions, Hamas is actually going strong despite it not wanting to win the elections, and is going forward with a united list. And that as a result of all of this, just in the last few days, the US signaled the Palestinian Authority that, hey, it's okay. If you want to postpone the elections, it's fine with us. Democracy be damned. You see, the US only supports elections as long as the US can get favorable outcomes for the elections. Now, with Israel denying Palestinians a vote in Jerusalem, there is an easy way out for Palestinians, of course, for Mahmoud Abbas. If he wished to withdraw from the elections, he can say that, no elections without East Jerusalem. There's been a lot of talk coming out of Ramallah about that, and about the possibility that the elections, the Legislative Council elections, will be postponed indefinitely. And that's pretty much where things are. But I want to actually, if I have a little bit of time, dig deep into the significance of holding the Palestinian legislative elections specifically within the existing context of Palestinian statehood and as part of the framework of a two-state solution in Oslo. And Nadia really laid the background for us really well in order to understand how all of this works. And the main focus for me is that that it's important that, with the understanding that the Palestinian Legislative Council was a product of the Oslo Agreement. It was born out of Oslo. And that the current reality that has forced Palestinians to come to terms with the fact that Oslo was a deviation from the course of liberation at best and from our national aspirations. And with the advantage of hindsight, knowing what we know today about the functioning of democracy under occupation or lack thereof, the question I want to address is this: will these elections lead to tangible outcomes in improving the security, economic viability, and the civil human rights of the Palestinians living under occupation within the areas that are being controlled by the Palestinian Authority? Will these elections improve their lives? And I believe any analysis of the elections, it needs to be grounded within the framework that Israel is a settler, colonial, expansionist project that is predicated on the continued forceful dispossession of the Palestinian people, whom it occupies. And as such, it is a fact that Israel controls every aspect of the occupied Palestinian population's lives. It controls their economy, their security, their borders, their birth registry, all exit and entry permits, including the ability to travel from one village to the next, and so much more than that. And so while over the last decade, many pundits, including leading Fatah figures, pronounced the two-state solution dead, the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas, continues to search for a way to maintain the status quo of negotiations. And it is within this context that these elections are being called, to appease the donor community and to get credibility for the Palestinian Authority and legitimacy for Palestinian Authority institutions. And I would argue that the sequence of the elections, as called for in Abbas's January 15th presidential decree, clearly indicates the priorities of the Palestinian Authority as well as the dominant Palestinian factions. Consider this, that the first elections will be for the Palestinian Legislative Council on May 22nd. These are elections that are held within areas under the control of the Palestinian Authority and under the control of Israel. And the Palestinian Authority itself is under Israeli control, and that many would say is serving actually as a proxy for the occupation. And we heard Nadia talk about the budget for the security apparatus that the PA has. An authority that exists for the purpose of negotiating with Israel as per the Oslo agreements. The elections would be held in accordance to the specific procedures outlined in the Oslo Accords. And let's remember that not only did the Oslo Accords expire, but they were never actually honored by Israel in the first place, and the Palestinians now believe that they were a disaster for their aspirations. It is only after the Palestinian Legislative Council elections and the presidential vote is held that we finally get to the promised land, with the grand finale, the elections of the PNC. Now remember, the Palestinian National Council is the highest decision-making body of the PLO, which claims to be the sole representative of the Palestinian people worldwide, including Palestinians like myself, living on the other side of the world. Now, I want to highlight a few things here before I finish. Although the PNC has never held any elections, it serves as the parliament that's representative of all Palestinians inside and outside the Palestinian territories and all the sectors of the worldwide Palestinian communities, including political parties, popular organizations, resistance movements, and independent figures from all sectors of life. The PNC and the PLO are not a product of Oslo, unlike the PA, which is a product of Oslo. And they are not subject to the Oslo Accords, unlike the Palestinian Authority. And they are not subject to Israeli control in the way that the Palestinian Authority and the dominant Palestinian factions are. With all of this in mind, one wonders, why are we having the Legislative Council and presidential elections first? Why not strengthen worldwide representation of all Palestinians? Aren't we stronger when we are united and when we are truly and accurately represented? The sequence of these elections clearly illustrates that the Palestinian Authority's first and foremost priority is to strengthen the credibility of its institutions and the power hold of the dominant Palestinian factions, namely Fatah and Hamas. Playing democracy under occupation enables them to boost international support for Palestinian governance in Gaza and in the West Bank. And this might be welcome news to those who suffer daily life under occupation and who are hoping that through these elections they will be able to put on display their anger with the status quo, the dominant factions, and the policies that come with them. And that's why we're seeing so many new political parties get established and so many lists running. In that sense, the elections are a good exercise in voicing protest and discontent. But let's be clear that what these elections in May will not do is revive the national liberation movement or be representative of all Palestinians inside and out of Palestine. Because if that were the case, the order of the elections would be the other way around. First, we would be looking at reforming the PLO and the Palestine National Council by way of holding elections for the Palestine National Council. So in conclusion, I want to say that the Palestinian Authority was built to be a governmental structure, not a liberation movement. Will this change if we had elections? I doubt it. The problem is not only Mahmoud Abbas, the problem is the existence of an authority and a security apparatus that is subservient to a settler, colonialist, occupationist regime. If anything, elections of the Palestine Legislative Council will further entrench the system and give it a new veneer of credibility. If the elections still go ahead, let's be mindful of this. This is a powerless democracy. It lacks control over basic life. It's a legislative council that is democratically elected but can't make many decisions. Nadia spoke about how difficult it is for the Legislative Council to do anything in reality under occupation. And so the question that we should should we support the illusion of this democracy under occupation, or should we push for real elections that challenge the status quo and invigorates the liberation movement by pushing for election at the Palestine National Council PLO level? And I believe we need to do that. But at the same time, I can't ignore the reality that the process itself of a looming election has indeed invigorated our political landscape in Palestine. And the fact is that we have so many new players on the scene. Vying for votes is a testimony to our people's resilience and aspirations for a better future.